how many of you are happy with your career and what you do for a living? And just thinking about it a little bit more, how many of you would say are a little bit unhappy or not so excited about what they do in terms of their working life? Anybody want to change or thinking about something different? Well, I'd like to just tell you a little bit of a personal story about myself and my working life and how it's all gone. So just a little bit of background on me. I live in New York City with my family. I work there. And I'm actually a fashion designer. I am the founder and lead fashion designer of my brand called Ernest Alexander. We're a menswear company that make fine tailored clothing, a lot of accessories, a lot of bags, jackets, neckties, and a lot of travel goods in the luxury category. And so I wanted to share with you a little day in the life, what it's like to be a fashion designer in New York City. So my day is probably quite typical and probably very similar to yours. You know, I live in downtown Manhattan in Chelsea, and the day usually starts with my two kids very early. Our favorite thing to do is make pancakes, so we make breakfast together. And then we hurry out the door, and I walk them to school, which is not too far away. And usually I stop at my favorite coffee place on the way back. It's called 71 Irving. It's on 17th Street. And I usually get an extra strong doppio cappuccino or something to kind of start the day. I catch up on my emails and sort of plan out what I'm going to do during that day. So that's where it all begins. And then I usually head into our design studio, which is about 10 blocks on 28th Street, 10 blocks away. And this is really kind of the nerve center where everything happens and where all the creativity goes on. And it's there that I usually sit down at this big desk where we have all our materials and start to work out various ideas that I'm thinking about of bringing out into our line. So I'll sit there, sketch, look at materials. And for me, really, the design process starts with the fabric. To me, it's all about starts with the fabric. And I begin with that vision, okay, like what are the colors? What's the feeling? What's the season? And there the idea starts to percolate of what kind of clothing that I'm going to make. And then what we do is we put it up on a mood board, really the inspiration for the season. This picture right here is for fall 2013 inspiration. It was sort of Baryshnikov meets Edgar Allan Poe. So that was what inspired me. And so I put the fabrics up, some initial ideas, and we really start to solidify the look and the feeling of the season. And this is a picture of me sort of hand sketching various designs. And here the idea gets a little more concrete in terms of what clothing, what pieces we're going to make. So I'd say this is one of the most favorite parts of my day, and I really enjoy it. Here's a little shot of my notebook where I sketch a lot. This is a Muji notebook. I don't know if any of you know Muji, the brand. It's my favorite notebook. I have probably 50 of these where I keep all my ideas, but the problem is they all look the same, so I end up losing half of my ideas. And then later on in the day, we might do a fitting, a model might come in, and here we adjust the patterns and make sure that what we're producing fits right and make any adjustments to all the details that was spec'd out. But I think one of the most enjoyable things is actually going from a sketch and finally seeing the actual product. You know, seeing something that was in your head, that little idea, come to life in person. And here's one of our overcoats done in an oxblood cashmere fabric. And it just brings such joy to know that something you thought of is now sort of a physical reality. And it's sort of one of the most enjoyable things about what I do. We actually make all of our line in the U.S. pretty much in New York City. About 2 blocks away is our main production facility. We make a lot of our bags and also our tailored goods. Here's a shot of our workshop. This is Maria. She runs the head place, and she's quite a character. But to me, what's great about making everything in the U.S. is that you really get to know the process, and you get to see it hands-on, and you get to know firsthand who is making your goods, and it makes the process so much more tangible. To really kind of understand the workmanship and the craftsmanship that goes behind each one of our pieces, to me, is very special. And then, I might end my day. We also have a store in Lower Manhattan in Soho, and I'll sort of meander down there with my thoughts and check in on the store, check in with our employees, maybe restyle the shelves or the window or change something up. And that's pretty much how I end my day. And I'd say overall, there are a lot of sort of things that stress me out about this job, but overall I'd say I'm very happy with what I do, and it's something that's quite enjoyable. But that wasn't always the case. In fact, I spent about 10 years, close to a decade, like just totally miserable with what I did for a living. And I actually worked more in the business world, doing various things in finance, also consulting. And literally I felt trapped, like a slave, doing endless presentations, like Excel modeling, PowerPoint slides, which the next day would just get tossed out by the client. And that drove me crazy, that you'd be spending so much of your efforts doing things, and at the end of the day, there wasn't too much to show for it. I say would have it, I actually ended up in business school up at Columbia, studying finance. And interestingly, this was the experience that I think totally shifted my mind. It was kind of funny. There are two things that happened. I ended up taking a personal leadership course with this sort of guru guy named Professor Hidendra Wadhwa. And it was this very sort of self-reflective class about your life and what you really want to do with it. And this was about 5 years ago, actually during the financial crisis. And so I had this huge shift in my thinking. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, look at the economy. It can just crash out. No job is safe. What are you really striving after? What do you want to do with your life? Again, a lot of mindless PowerPoint. I wanted to escape this world. And I thought to myself, what was I really striving after? To me, it felt like somebody else's ideal, somebody else's dream. In America, there's this sort of perfect vision of, you have 2.5 kids, a nice car, a nice little house. And to me, growing up, the options seemed very limited. Like either you go into finance and you make a lot of money, or you go into law, you become a lawyer and you're upstanding, or maybe you become a doctor. And those are all sort of great careers, but for me personally, I never felt that that's what I really wanted to do. I was living somebody else's life and not really doing that well at it, to boot. And so during this time in school, I had this very sort of big self-reflection. Who am I really? What am I really interested in? What I really want to do with my life? And I think part of it actually stems from how I was brought up in my family. And actually, my grandmother and great-grandmother and my mother all immigrated here from Latvia. They were Latvian, and they worked a lot with their hands, and they literally came here with nothing, just the clothing on their backs. And they worked so hard. They actually worked in the garment industry sewing up in Massachusetts outside of Boston, just tirelessly sewing. So I grew up in a house filled with all their dresses, all the fruits of their labor, their old sewing machines and patterns. And I think subconsciously this really, really inspired me, the fact that you can actually put in a good day's work and make something. And I think looking back, it was always my secret dream to do something like this of my own. But I was a little bit sort of scared of saying that because it didn't quite fit the norm. And I don't know how many of you, maybe by show of hands, have a sort of secret desire or secret dream that you've always wanted to do, but maybe haven't really told anybody. I don't know. But for me, it was buried down there deep, and it took this experience of the financial crisis, I think, also being in this heavy business environment of business school to realize that. So, how does somebody with absolutely no experience in fashion, no idea what he's doing, change paths and do something different? Well, it was quite scary. I had no idea what I was doing. I had never been a fashion designer before. I didn't know how to make a thing, right? But as fate would have it, and sometimes the stars align, in New York City, there's still quite a healthy garment district. It's dwindling a bit, but you can still get a lot done there. And so literally, without knowing anybody, I just sort of started asking around, who works in fashion? Do I have a friend that works here or there? And I just asked a friend who knew a friend, and I would hoof it to the garment district by myself, knocking on doors. Okay, where do you get fabric? Where do you get leather? How do you get stuff made? How does this process all work? It was quite a scary time, not knowing a thing. And additionally with that, I think I always had this secret dream of creating the perfect men's accessories, actually. So that was one of my secret desires. And I never felt like there was the perfect man bag out there, something that was stylish enough but also rugged. And so I began with this idea of let's create the perfect men's bag. And I sat down at my desk at home, and I started making these very sort of crude sketches, trying to spec out what that would be like. And I took it to one of the local workshops, and we started working through my ideas. And a few months later, we kind of worked through the patterns, worked through my ideas, and we came up with what would be probably the worst bag ever known in the history of mankind. And I apologize, ladies, if any of you own this bag. Actually, it's not really a bag, but just to give you an idea, I don't have a picture of that one. I think we threw it out. So that was very hard, like not making something I worked so long on and having it not come out so great. But undeterred, I came back to the table. We reworked some things, and we came up with the first design. And I actually brought today, this is sample 0002 of the bag. I actually wear it still every day, so it's gotten quite beat up. But it still holds its shape, basically. So, and this was the core of my product. I started with this one bag in 5 colors. I started a website. I took a lot of the photographs myself, and I launched with e-commerce. We started an e-commerce site, got a little bit of press, and things started to sell from there. And I kind of got this glimmer of hope that, oh my gosh, like I've created something, and these random strangers are buying it. This is great. But there were a lot of rocky roads along the way. I mean, the first part was money, because essentially I didn't pay myself for the first few years of the business, so that was very, very tough. To not be earning a salary. The second thing was sort of a year in, I would often run into my old business school classmates. And I remember vividly this one experience of running into a buddy of mine, and he was this Wall Street guy, and he's a really nice suit. And I was all sweaty. I was running through the garment district. I had a roll of leather under my arm and some bag of fabric. And I bumped into him suddenly on the sidewalk. He's like, what are you doing? And it's like, what's up with you? Like, you hear you're sweating, you have this roll of leather. And to me, I was like a little bit sort of shocked, a little bit embarrassed too, because here was this guy that obviously looked successful and he was doing sort of good things. But inside of me, I sort of have this principle, and I think it came a lot through this leadership class I took. And it's this idea of having like an inner guidance, something called like an inner charioteer. Like that, I think people have a lot of interests, right? And any sort of halfway smart person can probably do a lot of things pretty well. And you might have these interests that pull you in one direction and another, but there's always needs to be that guiding voice pulling you to the center and reining those desires in. So being able to kind of say like, no, I don't want to go back to that life. This is the direction I want to go in, and carrying on that path is something that I did. And so from there, things started to fall in place, and it was a lot of hard work, but eventually we got more recognition and got picked up by a lot of various press. So we've been featured in GQ, Monocle, press started building, Esquire, and then actually a few months ago, we were just named one of the best new men's designers in America. So, thank you. So to me, this was quite a shock, going from my kitchen where I was sort of hand and chicken scratch making bags to, 4 years later, being named this, I think was, incredibly overwhelming. But obviously, I don't want to sort of rest on press, and we get to keep the sales going forward and onto other things. And of course, that's enjoyable, but that's not what really gives me like any real joy. I mean, I think the real joy comes from seeing on the street strangers carrying my stuff. And if you're ever on the New York subway system, you carry my bag, don't get worried if you see me coming up behind you with a camera phone taking a little sneaky pics. Like, some people think I'm a little bit of a stalker, but I get that little heart race whenever I see somebody carrying our things. So to me, that's the most enjoyable thing. And there's one last idea I'd like to leave you with, and this is also something that came out of this class that I took in business school, and that's this idea of flow. Now, I don't know how many of you play a musical instrument or perhaps dance, or maybe you're heavily into mathematics. This notion of flow, like, have you ever been in that moment where you're so immersed in something, you're so tired because you've danced for 2 hours straight, or you've played music for 2 hours straight, and you almost reach this other level of consciousness where your best work comes out and you sort of can block out the rest of the world and you forget everything. It's this sort of sense of complete joy and flow that you get. And to me, that's happiness, and that's something that I always want to seek out in my career. And for me, the ultimate flow is this. Thank you.